The room smelled of flowers, candles, and polished wood. My graduation party was in full swing, a blur of laughter, congratulations, and clinking glasses. Everyone was smiling, or at least wearing the practiced, polite smile that parties demanded. I had spent the afternoon adjusting my dress, straightening my hair, making sure my smile didn't tremble too much. I wanted today to be perfect, a celebration of years of hard work and sacrifice. My mom hovered near the buffet, chatting quietly with a cousin while I drifted from group to group, offering hugs and shy thanks to the relatives who had shown up. My scholarship had been a big deal for me, more than just money. It was validation. A recognition that the countless late nights studying, the anxiety, the constant self-doubt, I had endured it all and come out on top. I thought my family would see that. Then my uncle arrived. Not just any uncle, the one who had always measured my worth with a cold, invisible ruler. He had that way of smiling while he judged, the kind of smile that made you wonder if he was happy for you, or just amused at your attempts. I tried to avoid him, moving to a corner with a plate of finger sandwiches. But of course, he found me. "So," he said, leaning against the counter, voice loud enough for a few people nearby to hear, "I hear you got a scholarship. Must be pity money, right? They just gave it to you because they felt sorry for your family's situation." The words landed like a hammer. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. A few giggles echoed from people in the room, a half-hearted, uncomfortable sound. I could feel my cheeks burning, the sting of humiliation crawling up my neck. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my mom, standing a few feet away, put a hand on my shoulder. "Ignore him," she said softly, trying to smooth over the moment, her eyes avoiding mine. "He doesn't mean it." I nodded, swallowing my shame along with the lump in my throat. I smiled, the tight, polite smile I had practiced in mirrors for years, the one that hid everything. Inside, my chest ached, a dull, constant throb of betrayal I didn't know how to name. I had trusted my family to be a safe place, and yet here was one of them, twisting what should have been my moment of pride into a public judgment. I moved away, seeking refuge near the edge of the room, where my professor had quietly slipped in. He was chatting with a small group of other guests, his calm presence like an anchor in a storm of faces. I hadn't expected him to come tonight, he was always so formal, but seeing him there with a warm smile felt like a lifeline. I watched my uncle from the corner of my eye, noticing the smug way he held his drink, the way he seemed to enjoy the ripple of discomfort he caused. I felt an odd mix of sadness and anger, but mostly just disappointment, deep, gnawing disappointment in the people I had hoped would celebrate me without judgment. The laughter continued around the room, polite, polite, polite. I wondered how many people truly saw the sting behind my smile, how many understood that this wasn't just a joke. It was an echo of every small dismissal I had endured over the years, every time my ideas were minimized, my efforts downplayed, my dreams casually mocked. I wanted to retreat, to vanish behind the curtains or under the table, anywhere that felt safe. But I stayed, frozen in place, holding my plate like a shield. My hands trembled slightly, though no one noticed. I forced myself to breathe, counting slowly to 10, trying to convince myself that ignoring him was enough, that staying quiet was the right thing to do. And yet, in the silence between the bursts of laughter, I noticed something else. My professor was watching not my uncle, not the room, but me. His eyes met mine, steady and unjudging, and in them I felt something I hadn't expected, recognition. Not of my scholarship, not of my accomplishments, but of me, the real me, behind the careful smiles and polite nods. That quiet look, that small, knowing nod he gave me, planted a seed in my chest, a fragile sense that maybe this humiliation wouldn't define me. Maybe the world was bigger than this room, bigger than this uncle's opinion, and maybe, just maybe, there were people who could see my worth without mocking it, without twisting it into a joke. For now, though, I stayed quiet. I smiled. I nodded. And I carried the weight of the insult silently, letting it settle into the corners of my heart where it could do its quiet work. I didn't yet know how, but something told me this night, this moment, would not be the end of my story. The night wound down, and guests began trickling out, hugs and small talk leaving a residue of halves, miles and polite goodbyes. I watched my uncle linger near the doorway, holding a drink, pretending to be engaged in conversation, but really just lingering, like a shadow I couldn't shake. My mother hovered nearby, her expression a mixture of worry and forced cheerfulness, and I realized I had never felt so alone in a room full of family. After the last guest left, I retreated to my bedroom, letting the door click softly behind me. I leaned against it, feeling the cool wood against my back, and let the flood of emotions I had been holding in finally rise. Anger, hurt, disappointment, a sharp, twisting ache that seemed to settle right behind my sternum. I thought of my uncle's words, repeated over and over in my mind, and felt a tiny spark of defiance begin to glow inside me. I wouldn't let him or anyone else steal my joy, not completely. The room felt quieter than usual, the hum of the house a gentle reminder that life kept moving, even when betrayal lingered in the air. I pulled out my laptop, scrolling through messages of congratulations from friends, teachers, and classmates. Each message was like a small lifeline, a reminder that my achievements were real, valid, and meaningful. Yet I couldn't shake the gnawing weight of my family's reaction. How could they fail to see my effort, my perseverance, my struggles? In the corner of my room, my graduation gown still hung neatly, the tassel swaying slightly as if caught in some invisible current. I touched it, remembering the months of studying late into the night, the endless revisions of essays, the nervous presentations, the silent prayers that my work would matter. And it did matter somewhere to someone. The realization was both comforting and bittersweet. The next morning I went through the motions. Breakfast was quiet, tension simmering beneath the surface. My mother tried to smooth over the night's events with small talk, but I could sense her unease, the guilt she carried for not standing up for me in the moment. My uncle avoided my gaze entirely, pretending to be absorbed in the newspaper, though I could see the occasional smirk as he read a headline. I learned, slowly, that some battles weren't meant to be fought in the open. Some victories were quieter, grown in patience, observation, and restraint. I spent the morning reflecting, taking notes in my journal, writing down thoughts I didn't yet have words for aloud. The hurt hadn't left me. It hadn't even dimmed, but I realized I could hold it differently now, like a weight I could carry without it crushing me. Mid-morning, a gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. It was my professor. He stood in the doorway, his presence calm and unassuming, a subtle authority that didn't need to be announced with loud gestures or grand speeches. He held an envelope in his hands, brown and crisp, edges sharp like the weight of importance. "I thought you might like to see this," he said softly, extending it toward me. His eyes were steady, patient, encouraging. I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the envelope, feeling the slight rigidity of its paper, the sense that inside was something I hadn't yet earned, but perhaps had always deserved. When I opened it, I found a letter from a prestigious scholarship committee I hadn't expected to hear back from so soon. They had selected me for a full academic fellowship to continue my studies, a recognition not just of grades, but of character, resilience, and potential. My hands trembled slightly as I read each line, a mix of disbelief and quiet triumph flooding my chest. The irony was sharp but sweet. My uncle's words meant to diminish me, now felt small against the quiet, unassuming validation of someone who truly saw my worth. I didn't shout or demand acknowledgement. I didn't parade my achievement around the house. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and held it close, a private triumph, a reminder that true recognition didn't need to be loud to be real. Later, I noticed my mother watching me from the doorway, eyes wide with a mix of pride and regret. She opened her mouth, probably to say something, then paused, realizing words weren't needed. I smiled at her gently, the first smile of the morning that wasn't tied to fear or restraint, but to calm, quiet confidence. And in that small, quiet moment, I understood something profound. Strength wasn't always loud. Respect wasn't always demanded. Sometimes it was quietly earned, grown in patience, observation, and self-respect. The hurt from last night hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It had sharpened my awareness, honed my resilience, and begun to teach me the most important lesson of all. The people who matter will see your worth, and the ones who don't are not yours to convince. After the morning revelation with my professor, the house felt different, though the tension lingered like a faint shadow. I went about my day quietly, deliberately, keeping a polite distance from my uncle and avoiding any unnecessary conversation. He, of course, acted as if nothing had happened, smiling faintly when I passed him in the hallway, but I could see the careful calculation behind his gaze. He expected me to shrink back into embarrassment, to let his words define me. Only I didn't, not anymore. I found a quiet corner in the living room, a soft chair by the window, and pulled out my journal. I wrote down my thoughts, not to impress anyone, but to give voice to the storm inside me. I reflected on my uncle's comment from last night, on the way my mother had tried to smooth it over, on the mix of shame and disappointment I had carried silently, and I noticed with surprising clarity a pattern. This wasn't just about one cruel remark. It was about repeated dismissals, subtle undermining, and the way my family sometimes measured love with judgment instead of support. I began to observe more carefully. My mother, usually so warm, flinched whenever my uncle spoke sharply to me, her smiles tight, her words careful. My father, though absent from last night's party, had always avoided conflict, never wanting to stir the pot. And my uncle, his smirk, the way he framed achievements as luck or pity, was not a one-off incident. It was a strategy, a way to keep control and assert superiority without ever seeming overtly cruel. That afternoon, my professor returned. He didn't bring more letters or speeches, just a quiet presence and a patient understanding. He handed me a small note, folded neatly, almost unremarkable. "Read this when you're ready," he said. His tone wasn't condescending or dramatic. It carried the quiet authority of someone who understood both potential and patience. I tucked the note into my journal and waited. Later that evening, after my uncle had gone out for one of his long, seemingly important calls, I opened the note. It was simple but profound. "Your achievements are yours, not theirs to diminish. Guard your heart, trust your effort, and never allow someone else's smallness to define your greatness." I read it several times, letting the words sink in. For years, I had carried an invisible measure of my family's approval, letting it dictate my confidence and self-worth. And now, I realized I could separate their judgment from my reality. My value was not theirs to negotiate. My success, my struggles, my resilience, these were mine. That night, I noticed subtle changes in the household. My uncle returned later than usual, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar knot of anxiety when I saw him. Instead, I observed quietly, noting the tension in his movements, the slight shift in his usual posture. There was something he hadn't anticipated. I was no longer the same person he had tried to belittle. Over the next few days, I practiced patience and calm observation. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. I simply carried myself differently, with quiet dignity and firm self-respect. I smiled politely when necessary, but the tension between us was now mine to control, not his. I realized that emotional strength didn't need to be loud. It could be gentle, steady, unyielding in its own quiet way. My mother noticed it too. One evening, while we were folding laundry together, she hesitated, then said softly, I'm proud of you, not just for the scholarship, but for how you've handled everything. Her voice wavered, a mixture of relief and guilt. I nodded, understanding that her words, though delayed, were sincere. And I forgave not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying resentment was heavy. Releasing it, even silently, felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. I also began to see my uncle differently, not just as a source of hurt, but as someone whose insecurities had dictated his behavior. Recognizing this didn't excuse him, but it gave me perspective. I no longer needed to react to him. His smallness could no longer diminish me because I had finally recognized my own vastness, built quietly through effort, patience, and reflection. By the time the weekend ended, I felt a calm strength settle in me, like a warm weight in my chest. It was not the loud triumph of dramatic confrontation. It was quieter, steadier, and infinitely more satisfying. I understood now that life's victories were not always performed on a stage for others to see. They were often private, nurtured in patience, observation, and self-respect. And somewhere in that quiet, I began to glimpse the truth of emotional justice. Those who tried to diminish me would eventually reveal themselves in their words and actions, without me needing to force the moment. I simply had to remain calm, aware, and unwavering in my integrity. That night, as I closed my journal and looked out the window at the darkened street, I realized that I was no longer the young woman trembling in silence at my graduation party. I was someone different now, calm, wise, and quietly unshakable, and the real reward wasn't the scholarship itself, but the inner strength I had discovered along the way. The next morning dawned clear and still. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, illuminating the small dust particles floating lazily in the air. There was a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet contrast to the storm of last night's humiliation. For the first time since my graduation party, I woke up without tension coiling in my chest. The night had been long, but it had given me something far more valuable than any celebration: clarity. I made my way to the kitchen, carefully placing the letter from my professor on the counter. I didn't need to announce it, to wave it in anyone's face. Its significance was mine alone, a testament to my effort, perseverance, and integrity. My mother was already there, sipping coffee, her eyes meeting mine briefly. No words were necessary. She gave a small, warm smile that carried pride and unspoken apology. I nodded back quietly, feeling a soft relief settle over us both. My uncle, predictably, appeared a few minutes later, holding a mug of coffee as if nothing had happened. I noticed immediately the subtle shift in his demeanor. He was measured, polite, careful not to provoke. For years, I had allowed him to unsettle me with his smirks, his quiet judgments, his ability to twist my accomplishments into something laughable. But this morning, I was untouched by it. My calmness was a shield stronger than any words I could have spoken. We exchanged greetings, brief and polite, and I poured myself a cup of tea. I felt the warmth seep into my hands and chest, anchoring me in the quiet strength I had cultivated over the last few days. Inside, I carried no resentment, no need to defend myself. My uncle's words no longer held power over me, not because he had changed, but because I had. Later, while sitting near the window with the letter from the scholarship committee in my lap, I noticed my father watching me from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but I caught a flicker of understanding. Over the years, he had often remained silent during family conflicts, avoiding confrontation and leaving me to navigate the emotional currents alone. But today, seeing me calm and composed, he seemed to recognize the quiet dignity I now carried. I smiled softly, a gesture of peace rather than triumph. As the day went on, small moments of truth emerged naturally, without confrontation. My uncle made a comment about someone else's minor achievement, and I noticed my mother flinch. I realized that the very behavior that had caused me pain for so long would continue to reveal itself to those around him. The room, the house, my family truth had a way of revealing itself without my interference. I didn't need to expose him. His words and actions were enough to show the contrast between smallness and integrity. By late afternoon, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with accolades or recognition. It was the quiet triumph of emotional mastery, the ability to witness betrayal without being consumed by it, to observe dishonesty without taking it on as my own, and to honor my achievement without needing external validation. I had grown calm, wise, and emotionally strong, not through confrontation or humiliation, but through patience, reflection, and self-respect. That evening, my mother approached me again, this time hesitating before speaking. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for not stepping up yesterday, for letting things be said without defending you." I reached for her hand, holding it with gentle warmth. "It's okay," I replied softly. "I understand. What matters is that I know my worth, and I don't need anyone to remind me of it." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment we shared a peaceful understanding that words could not fully capture. As night fell, I retreated to my room, placing the letter from my professor carefully in a drawer, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I no longer needed it as a shield. It was a reminder, yes, but also a symbol of my inner strength, a quiet strength built through observation, patience, and self-respect. I felt an incredible sense of freedom, a release from the invisible chains of judgment and expectation that had weighed on me for so long. I thought of my uncle, of his carefully measured words, and for the first time I felt no anger. Instead, I felt clarity and peace. Emotional justice didn't require me to shout or retaliate. It required only that I live fully, honor my worth, and allow truth to reveal itself naturally. His actions had consequences, not immediate, dramatic ones, but subtle and undeniable. Others would see what I had seen, and he could not rewrite the reality of who I had become. As I lay down that night, the room bathed in soft moonlight, I realized the greatest gift of all was not the scholarship, not the recognition, but the quiet, unshakable sense of dignity I had cultivated. Life's challenges, its betrayals and small cruelties, could not touch me anymore, not because they disappeared, but because I had learned to carry myself with calm strength and inner peace. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I finally understood the truth of my journey, the power of self-respect, the value of emotional boundaries, and the profound beauty of standing tall, without shouting, without proving, simply by being unwaveringly true to oneself.